Caitlyn Clark didn't become the most powerful name in women's basketball because of a buzzer beater, a record-breaking night, or even a championship run. That's the part most people get wrong. Her real takeover didn't happen on the court, and it didn't even happen in the WNBA. It started somewhere much quieter, in a place nobody thought to look, and by the time the sports world realized what was happening, brands were already 10 steps ahead. What makes this story different isn't just how fast Caitlyn rose. It's who noticed first, who moved fastest, and who is still trying to catch up. Because while fans were arguing about rankings and rookies, something else was unfolding behind the scenes. Companies that live and die by attention were watching Caitlyn closely, and they weren't seeing just an athlete. They were seeing leverage. And once that switch flipped, the entire ecosystem around women's sports started to shift. Quietly at first, then all at once. Months before the Nike campaign exploded across the internet, before the debates, the edits, and the viral clips, Caitlyn Clark appeared in a State Farm commercial that almost nobody expected to matter. At the time, she was still at Iowa. A college superstar, yes, but not a household name. Not a cultural figure. Just another elite athlete doing an endorsement deal. Except the reaction inside marketing rooms told a completely different story. When the ad aired, something felt off in the best possible way. Caitlyn didn't come across like a college player trying to hit her marks or survive a script. She looked comfortable, natural, like someone who had been doing national commercials for years. Her timing landed. Her delivery didn't feel forced. There was no stiffness, no hesitation, no athlete learning how to act energy. It felt effortless. And then the data came in. The performance metrics didn't just exceed expectations, they blew past them. Engagement jumped. Completion rates stayed high. Viewer sentiment spiked. Compared to similar campaigns, the response was abnormal. Marketers watching realized they weren't just seeing a successful ad, they were seeing proof of concept. Caitlyn wasn't simply recognizable. She held attention. That distinction matters more than most fans realize. Plenty of athletes are famous. Very few can keep people watching when there's nothing happening but a camera and a few lines of dialogue. Caitlyn could. And that single realization changed how brands began to view her. From that moment on, she wasn't treated like an athlete who could appear in commercials. She was treated like a commercial engine who happened to be an athlete. And once that label sticks, the entire game changes. Once that State Farm commercial proved what Caitlyn could do on camera, the shift didn't happen publicly. There were no headlines, no announcements, no big celebratory posts. Instead, things started happening the way they usually do when real money is involved. Quietly, carefully, behind closed doors. Inside brand offices, Caitlyn's name started coming up in conversations that had nothing to do with college basketball. Marketing teams weren't asking whether she was talented enough. That part was obvious. They were asking something much more important. How fast could they get to her, and how long before everyone else figured it out? Nike noticed. Gatorade noticed. Wilson noticed. Not because they were trying to make a statement about women's sports, but because they saw a rare alignment. Skill, personality, camera presence, and timing all converging at once. That combination doesn't show up often, and when it does, brands don't wait for permission. What made Caitlyn especially appealing wasn't just her reach. It was the type of attention she pulled in. People didn't scroll past her clips. They stopped. They watched. They argued. They shared. And in marketing, that kind of reaction is gold. Attention you can't buy is always worth more than attention you can. While fans were still debating whether her style would translate at the next level, brands were already operating under a different assumption. They weren't asking if she would translate. They were asking how big the return would be when she did. And here's the part that made the gap start to show. While companies were mapping out long-term plans, the league itself was still treating Caitlyn like a promising future asset. A rookie. Someone to ease in. Someone to wait on. That difference in urgency would end up mattering more than anyone realized. Because brands don't build campaigns around patience. They build around momentum. And Caitlyn's momentum was accelerating whether the system was ready or not. And that growing gap between how brands saw her and how the league handled her? That tension didn't stay quiet for long. As Caitlyn's visibility kept rising, Nike found itself in an uncomfortable position. On paper, the brand had everything it needed. Decades of dominance, deep ties to basketball, a reputation built on empowering athletes. But online, a different narrative was gaining traction, and it wasn't flattering. Fans and advocates for women's sports started calling Nike out publicly. The messages were blunt. If Nike truly believed in supporting girls and women, why did it feel like they disappeared when it actually mattered? Why were female athletes constantly used as symbols, but rarely defended when conversations got uncomfortable? The "Dear Nike" posts spread fast. They weren't organized campaigns. They were organic, emotional, and relentless. People weren't asking for another slogan. They were demanding action. And every viral post added another layer of pressure to a company that hates being seen as out of touch with culture. Nike couldn't ignore it. Not this time. The timing made it worse. Caitlyn Clark was exploding in visibility right as these criticisms were peaking. That created a problem and an opportunity at the same time. Nike could stay quiet and risk confirming everything critics were saying, or they could respond in a way that felt undeniable. This wasn't about releasing another safe commercial. It was about reclaiming control of the narrative. If Nike was going to move, they had to move decisively. Subtly wouldn't work. Soft messaging wouldn't land. Whatever they did had to be bold enough to shut the conversation down. Behind the scenes, the strategy became clear. If they were going to answer the criticism, they'd do it the only way Nike knows how. With a moment so strong that it didn't argue back, it simply overwhelmed the debate. And that's when the commercial everyone would later obsess over began to take shape. When Nike finally released the commercial, it didn't start the way anyone expected. No music, no narration, no explosive visuals. Just silence. A dim locker room. Caitlyn Clark sitting alone. Calm. Still. Completely unbothered. Then she lifts her head. For a split second, everything slows down. She opens one eye, and the internet immediately locked onto it. At first glance, it didn't even look real. The iris seemed almost reptile-like, glowing under the shadows. People started pausing the video, zooming in, enhancing the frame, posting screenshots, and debating what they were seeing. Some thought it was a snake eye. Others swore it was CGI. A few claimed it was just a lighting trick. But as more people looked closer, something clicked. Hidden inside that single frame was the Kobe Bryant black Mamba logo, subtly worked into her pupil. That's when the reaction exploded. One frame turned into a symbol. A symbolic handoff. The fiercest competitor of one generation quietly passing the torch to the next. Nike never explained it. They didn't have to. The silence made it louder. Fans filled in the meaning themselves, and that made it feel earned instead of manufactured. People who had never watched a WNBA game were suddenly dissecting a Nike ad frame by frame. Edits flooded social media. Wallpapers, slow-motion breakdowns, reaction videos. Comment sections filled with messages saying this was the hardest opening shot Nike had done in years. And what made it hit even harder was who it was centered on. Not a champion with a decade-long resume. Not a legend at the end of her career. A rookie. A player just entering the league. Nike didn't just feature Caitlyn Clark. They anointed her. And that moment did something the league itself hadn't fully done yet. It framed Caitlyn not as a future star, but as a present force. Someone already worthy of myth-making. And that was only the opening. After that opening shot, the commercial didn't slow down. It expanded. Caitlyn appeared alongside some of the most dominant women in sports. Aya Wilson, Sabrina Ionescu, Sha'Carri Richardson. Athletes who had already carved out their own lanes and earned their respect through years of excellence. The message wasn't subtle. It wasn't soft. It was defiant. The voiceover didn't try to inspire in a gentle way. It challenged the viewer directly. You'll be told you can't do it. So do it anyway. You'll be told you can't win. So win. Line after line dismantled the excuses and limitations girls hear growing up, and every shot reinforced the same idea. Try to stop us. You won't. What stood out wasn't just the words. It was where the attention kept landing. Even in a lineup packed with stars, Caitlyn's presence felt different. Her scenes didn't blend in. They pulled focus. Not because Nike forced it, but because viewers gravitated toward her naturally. Reaction videos told the story better than any press release could. People kept rewinding her moments, pausing on her expressions, talking about her energy. That's when the conversation shifted. She wasn't being discussed as one of many athletes in the ad. She was being talked about as the centerpiece, as the face, as the anchor holding the entire message together. Within hours, the internet had decided what the commercial only hinted at. Caitlyn Clark wasn't just part of a movement. She was becoming the symbol of it. If you scroll through the comments, you'll see the same realization play out over and over again. People saying they didn't expect to care this much. People admitting they watched the ad multiple times. People realizing, mid-comment, that they were emotionally invested in someone they barely followed a year ago. And that kind of connection doesn't come from branding alone. It comes from timing, authenticity, and a sense that you're watching someone step into something bigger than themselves in real time. At this point, it was obvious the commercial had worked. But what happened next is what really shocked the industry. The reaction didn't fade after the commercial ended. It multiplied. Within hours, the numbers told a story that was impossible to ignore. Tens of millions of views. Clips circulating across platforms that had nothing to do with basketball. People who had never followed the WNBA suddenly searching Caitlyn Clark highlights, interviews, and merch. And that's the difference between buzz and power. Buzz gets people talking. Power gets people to act. Gatorade saw it immediately. Campaigns featuring Caitlyn didn't just perform well, they cleared shelves. Bottles, towels, limited merch runs sold out faster than expected. Wilson released basketballs with her initials, and what some critics mocked early on as overconfident branding turned into collector items almost overnight. Resale listings popped up. Kids started showing up to school with Caitlyn-branded gear. Parents who couldn't name 5 WNBA players were suddenly asking about release dates. This is what marketers call conversion. Not views. Not likes. Purchases. Caitlyn wasn't just pulling in existing fans. She was creating new ones. That's the rarest outcome in sports marketing, and it's why executives were paying attention long before headlines caught up. If you're noticing a pattern here, that's not an accident. Stories like this don't usually get told from the inside out, and if you're enjoying how this one is unfolding, that's exactly the kind of deep dive we keep doing here. No hype, no fluff, just the real forces shaping modern sports. What made it even more uncomfortable was where that momentum was coming from. It wasn't being driven by the league. It was being driven by brands that understood the moment better than the system Caitlyn was playing inside. And once fans started pointing that out, the conversation took a sharper turn. As Caitlyn's influence kept expanding, something strange became harder to explain away. Almost every major brand around her was moving aggressively, creatively, and confidently. And the league she played in, it felt like it was always a step behind. Nike built a moment around her. Gatorade built campaigns. Wilson turned her name into a product people hunted for. Then the LPGA stepped in and showed exactly what it looks like when an organization fully understands star power. They didn't just invite Caitlyn to an event. They built the event around her. Cameras followed her everywhere. Fans got access. Tickets moved. Clips spread. Broadcasters replayed her swings like she was already part of their world. It wasn't forced, and it didn't feel awkward. It felt intentional. The LPGA treated Caitlyn like what she already was, a cultural magnet. And fans noticed. The contrast was uncomfortable. Outside organizations were leaning into Caitlyn's moment, while the WNBA often looked cautious. Slow to adapt. Careful with exposure. As if this surge might burn out if they acknowledged it too loudly. But momentum doesn't wait for comfort. It rewards decisiveness. Online, frustration started to surface. Not from critics of women's basketball, but from people who wanted to see it thrive. They could feel the imbalance. Caitlyn wasn't riding a wave created by the league. The league was riding hers. And the longer that went unaddressed, the louder the conversation became. What shocked people inside the industry wasn't just Caitlyn's reach. It was how naturally she handled it. No forced personality. No visible strain. She looked the same on camera as she did on the court. Calm. Confident. Unrushed. That consistency made brands trust her even more. At this point, the question wasn't whether Caitlyn Clark was a star. That debate was over. The real question was what happens when a single player's gravity starts pulling an entire system off balance. What Nike released wasn't just another commercial. It was a line in the sand. A signal to every brand watching that Caitlyn Clark isn't a promising rookie or a temporary spike in attention. She's a movement forming in real time. Every sign points in the same direction. Her next shoe drop won't just sell out, it'll redefine expectations. Her next endorsement won't feel like a partnership, it'll feel like a cultural event. And every company that hesitated a year ago is now scrambling for a way in, hoping they didn't miss the window. This is what happens when an athlete stops being marketed and starts becoming the market. When commercials don't just promote products, but introduce people to a new center of gravity. Caitlyn isn't just driving viewership. She's shaping habits, conversations, and culture in ways the system around her never fully prepared for. And movements don't ask for permission. They grow. They pull people in. They force institutions to adapt or fall behind. Whether the WNBA is ready or not, this era is already underway. If you've made it this far, you already see where this is going. Stories like this don't end quietly, and the next chapter is going to be even louder. So if you want to stay ahead of what's coming next in sports, culture, and the power shifts happening behind the scenes, make sure you're subscribed. Drop a like if this changed how you see Caitlyn's rise, and let me know in the comments whether you think the league is ready for what she's becoming. Because this isn't just about one player anymore. It's about who understands the moment first.